There are mountains where the weather is so brutal, it doesn't matter how skilled you are. The mountains simply won't let you climb. Welcome to a journey through the peaks where weather itself becomes the ultimate opponent, creating conditions so extreme that even the most accomplished mountaineers are forced to turn back. Today, we're exploring the mountains with the most savage weather on Earth, and I'll explain exactly what makes each one nearly impossible to climb. These aren't just tall mountains. These are places where the atmosphere itself turns hostile, where wind speeds exceed hurricane force, where temperatures plummet so low that frostbite strikes within moments, and where storms can trap climbers for weeks. We'll move from extremely difficult to almost impossible, traveling across continents to understand the unique weather systems that guard each peak. Let's begin our journey in Pakistan's Karakoram Range, where our first mountain creates some of the most unpredictable and violent weather systems in the Himalayas. K2, the Savage Mountain. Rising 8,611 meters above sea level, K2 stands as the second highest mountain on Earth, but it's the weather here that has earned it the deadliest reputation of any 8,000-meter peak. 1 in 4 climbers who attempt K2 never returns, a staggering toll that speaks to the mountain's unforgiving nature. K2 doesn't just challenge climbers, it actively fights them. What makes K2's weather so extreme starts with its location. The mountain sits at the convergence of multiple weather systems. Storms roll in from the Arabian Sea to the south, Arctic air masses descend from the north, and the jet stream frequently dips low enough to batter the upper slopes directly. This creates a meteorological battleground where conditions can shift from clear to catastrophic within hours. But the real killer on K2 is the wind. The mountain's pyramid shape acts like a funnel, accelerating winds to speeds that regularly exceed 160 kilometers per hour. At those velocities, standing becomes impossible. Tents shred like paper. Climbers have reported being knocked flat by gusts so powerful they felt like physical blows. The famous bottleneck, a narrow couloir beneath a hanging glacier, becomes a wind tunnel where gusts can literally blow climbers off the mountain. Temperature is another brutal factor. Even in summer, temperatures at K2's summit hover around -45 degrees Celsius. But when you factor in wind chill, the effective temperature drops to -70 or lower. At those temperatures, frostbite occurs in minutes, and any exposed skin begins to freeze almost immediately. Supplemental oxygen systems freeze and fail. Equipment becomes brittle and breaks. Your body loses heat faster than it can generate it, even with the best modern gear. Then there's the storm duration. On Everest, weather windows might last several days, giving climbers time to summit and descend. On K2, clear weather might last only hours. Teams have waited weeks at high camps for a summit window, only to have storms close in before they can reach the top. The 2008 disaster, where 11 climbers died in a single day, began when weather deteriorated faster than anyone predicted. Survivors described winds so strong they couldn't move, and whiteout conditions so complete they couldn't see their own hands. What makes K2's weather truly unforgiving is that there's no easy route. Every approach involves sustained exposure to extreme conditions. Unlike Everest, where fixed ropes and established camps provide some shelter, K2 offers no safe zones. You're exposed from the moment you leave base camp until you return. The weather doesn't give you breaks. It tests you constantly, and the moment you make a mistake, it punishes you. From Pakistan's Karakoram, we travel west to another giant where the weather creates a different but equally deadly challenge. Our next mountain generates storms so powerful and so frequent that it has one of the highest fatality rates of any peak on Earth, and weather is the primary killer. Annapurna. The Avalanche Factory. Standing 8,091 meters tall in central Nepal, Annapurna holds a dark distinction. Nearly 1 in 3 climbers who challenge this peak will die trying, the highest death rate of any 8,000-meter mountain. While technical difficulty plays a role, the weather here creates conditions that make the mountain's greatest danger unavoidable: avalanches. Annapurna sits directly in the path of monsoon systems moving north from the Bay of Bengal. This position means the mountain receives enormous amounts of precipitation, far more than neighboring peaks. The south face of Annapurna is one of the most avalanche-prone slopes in the Himalayas. Heavy snowfall, combined with steep terrain and unstable seracs, means that avalanches sweep the mountain constantly. But here's what makes the weather so deadly. It's not just the amount of snow, but how quickly conditions change. A single storm can dump meters of fresh snow in hours, loading slopes beyond their breaking point. Weather forecasting helps, but on Annapurna, conditions deteriorate so rapidly that teams often find themselves trapped in the danger zone when storms arrive earlier than predicted. Temperature fluctuations on Annapurna are extreme and rapid. Daytime warming can destabilize snow that fell overnight, triggering avalanches throughout the afternoon. Then temperatures plunge at night, creating ice layers that become failure planes for future slides. This cycle repeats constantly during climbing season. The weather creates a moving puzzle where safe routes in the morning become death traps by afternoon. Climbers describe the constant sound of avalanches, the feeling that the entire mountain is collapsing around them. Wind on Annapurna is less severe than on K2, but it's still brutal. Gusts regularly exceed 100 kilometers per hour on the upper mountain, and the wind doesn't just threaten climbers directly. It redistributes snow, creating cornices and wind slabs that collapse without warning. Some of Annapurna's deadliest accidents have occurred when seemingly stable snow bridges collapsed under climbers, triggered by wind-loaded slopes failing catastrophically. The weather here weaponizes the terrain itself. What makes Annapurna's weather particularly treacherous is visibility. The combination of blowing snow, cloud cover, and frequent storms creates conditions where climbers can't distinguish between solid ground and deadly crevasses hidden just beneath the surface. In whiteout, depth perception vanishes entirely. A 1-meter drop looks identical to a 100-meter abyss. Multiple expeditions have become lost on Annapurna's relatively straightforward routes simply because they couldn't see where they were going. The weather doesn't just make climbing difficult, it makes basic navigation impossible. The monsoon timing adds another layer of danger. Annapurna's best climbing weather occurs in narrow windows before and after the monsoon season, but these windows are unpredictable and often shorter than expected. Teams might wait weeks for weather to clear, burning through supplies and energy only to face deteriorating conditions on summit day. The mountain's weather creates a brutal calculation: push for the summit in marginal conditions and risk everything, or wait for perfect weather that might never come. Mount Everest, the jet stream fortress. At 8,848 meters, Mount Everest is the tallest mountain on Earth, and for several months each year, it is also one of the most meteorologically violent. What makes Everest unique is not storm frequency or snowfall. It is the wind. Specifically, it is what happens when the jet stream descends to summit elevation. From October through April, Everest's summit sits directly in the path of the jet stream. Sustained winds of 280 to 320 kilometers per hour are common during these months. These are not gusts. These are sustained winds with velocities matching those of an EF5 tornado, strong enough to tear poorly secured equipment off the mountain, to blow climbers off exposed ridges, and to make human survival impossible above 8,000 meters. The sound alone is described as deafening, a constant roar that makes communication impossible. At these wind speeds, the wind chill factor becomes irrelevant because the numbers become meaningless. Your body simply cannot generate enough heat to survive. Modern down suits, supplemental oxygen, chemical warmers, none of it matters when you are exposed to 300 kilometers per hour winds at minus 40 degrees Celsius. But here is what is remarkable about Everest's weather. It is predictable. Unlike K2 or Annapurna, where storms can arrive with little warning, Everest's extreme winds follow a seasonal pattern. In late April and May, the jet stream lifts north, creating a brief window when winds drop to merely dangerous levels rather than impossible ones. This window, typically lasting only a few weeks, is when virtually all successful Everest summits occur. Even during the climbing season, Everest's weather remains brutal. Summit winds still average 60 to 80 kilometers per hour during good conditions. Temperatures remain around minus 35 degrees Celsius, the death zone. Above 8,000 meters offers no shelter, no respite, no margin for error. What makes these conditions survivable is not that the weather improves, it is that it becomes just barely tolerable for the few hours needed to reach the summit and descend. The difference between a successful summit and a disaster is often just a 20 kilometers per hour increase in wind speed or a 5-degree temperature drop. The famous 1996 disaster illustrates Everest's weather perfectly. On May 10, 8 climbers died when a storm arrived faster than forecasted. Winds that had been merely difficult became catastrophic. Visibility dropped to zero. Teams that were hours from safety became lost and disoriented in complete whiteout conditions just below the summit. But here is what makes this particularly deadly. At 8,000 meters, your brain is starving for oxygen. You're slow, confused, making poor decisions. When the storm hits and you lose visibility, you are trying to navigate complex terrain while hypoxic and hypothermic, unable to think clearly even as survival demands your sharpest judgment. The weather does not need to be as severe as on K2 because the altitude has already compromised your ability to survive it. Kangchenjunga, the Monsoon Trap. Further east, the border between Nepal and India is guarded by a mountain that doesn't just freeze you, it drowns you in snow. Kangchenjunga, rising 8,586 meters as the third highest mountain on Earth, Kangchenjunga sits further east than most other 8,000-meter peaks, positioned directly in the path of monsoon systems moving north from the Bay of Bengal. This geography creates weather conditions that are less violent than K2, but more consistently terrible than almost anywhere else in the high Himalayas. The result is simple: it snows, constantly. Kangchenjunga receives more precipitation than neighboring peaks, and that snowfall continues throughout much of the climbing season. Fresh snow accumulates rapidly, creating unstable conditions on steep faces. Routes that were manageable yesterday become avalanche zones today. The mountain is always changing, always unstable, always dangerous. Climbers describe Kangchenjunga as exhausting in a way other peaks aren't. You're not just fighting wind or cold, you're fighting through deep, fresh snow with every step. The constant snowfall also creates visibility problems. Unlike Everest, where whiteouts occur during specific storm events, Kangchenjunga often sits in cloud for days or weeks at a time. Climbers lose precious days waiting for visibility to improve, burning through supplies and energy while snow continues to accumulate above them. When brief clear periods do arrive, teams must race to make progress before the next system moves in. The weather creates a constant sense of urgency and frustration. Temperature-wise, Kangchenjunga isn't the coldest mountain on this list, but the high humidity makes the cold penetrate deeper. Everything stays damp, gear doesn't dry out, ice accumulates on ropes and equipment, your clothing holds moisture, reducing its insulating properties. You're constantly cold in a way that's different from the dry cold of higher peaks, a cold that seeps into your bones and never leaves. Combined with the constant effort of breaking trail through deep snow, this creates a uniquely exhausting environment. Wind on Kangchenjunga is less extreme than on exposed peaks like K2, but it's persistent and biting. The mountain's location means it catches weather systems from multiple directions, creating swirling, unpredictable wind patterns. These winds don't reach the catastrophic speed seen on Everest's summit, but they're strong enough to make climbing miserable and dangerous. At 60 to 80 kilometers per hour, wind doesn't knock you down, but it constantly drains your energy and makes precise movement difficult. Nanga Parbat, the Killer Mountain. Standing 8,126 meters tall in northern Pakistan, Nanga Parbat has earned its nickname the Killer Mountain through brutal experience. Roughly 1 in 5 climbers who attempt this peak will perish, one of the deadliest records in mountaineering. And the primary killer is not technical difficulty. It is the weather. Specifically, it is what the weather does to the mountain's massive rupal face, creating avalanche conditions so severe that the face has become synonymous with death in mountaineering circles. Nanga Parbat's position creates a unique meteorological situation. The mountain stands alone, the westernmost 8,000-meter peak, jutting dramatically from the surrounding landscape with over 4,000 meters of vertical relief from base to summit. This isolation means it catches weather systems directly, with no nearby peaks to block or divert storms. When weather hits Nanga Parbat, it hits with full force. The mountain's massive faces act like collectors, gathering enormous amounts of snow during storm cycles. but it is the Rupel face where weather becomes truly deadly. This 4,500-meter wall is one of the highest mountain faces on Earth, and it is constantly loaded with unstable snow. The weather patterns here create a perfect avalanche factory. Heavy snowfall accumulates on steep terrain. Temperature fluctuations create weak layers. Then winds load the slopes even further, adding cornices and wind slabs to an already unstable structure. The result is predictable. Massive avalanches sweep the face with terrifying regularity. These are not small slides. The avalanches on Nanga Parbat are enormous, sometimes starting above 7,000 meters and running all the way to base camp. They carry enough force to obliterate anything in their path. Multiple expeditions have been completely wiped out by single avalanche events. Their camps swept away so thoroughly that virtually nothing was recovered. The weather creates conditions where the mountain itself becomes a weapon, hurling thousands of tons of snow and ice down its faces. Wind on Nanga Parbat is particularly brutal because of the mountain's exposure. With no neighboring peaks to provide shelter, the mountain catches wind from every direction. Climbers describe being pinned in their tents for days as storms batter the mountain, winds tearing at fabric, snow piling up around shelters. The isolation means that when weather deteriorates, there is nowhere to hide, no safe camps, no protected zones. You are simply exposed until the storm passes. Temperature swings on Nanga Parbat are extreme. The mountain's lower latitude means daytime temperatures can be relatively warm, but nights plunge to brutal lows. This diurnal cycle creates a constant freeze-thaw pattern that destabilizes snow, triggers rockfall, and makes route conditions change dramatically throughout each day. What was safe at dawn becomes suicidal by afternoon. The weather forces climbers into a narrow window of relatively stable conditions that might last only a few hours each day. Mount Vinson, the Antarctic apocalypse. At 4,892 meters, Mount Vinson is the highest peak in Antarctica. It's not particularly tall by Himalayan standards, and technically it's considered one of the easier 7 summits. But don't let that fool you. The weather on Mount Vinson represents a level of environmental extremity that few places on Earth can match. This is the coldest, windiest, most hostile climbing environment on the planet. And what makes it truly terrifying is that these conditions aren't occasional storm events. They're the norm. Let's start with temperature. Mount Vinson sits deep in the Antarctic interior, far from any moderating ocean influence. Summer temperatures at base camp typically range from -30 to -40 degrees Celsius. On the summit, temperatures rarely rise above -45, and they can drop to -60 or lower. These aren't wind chill temperatures. These are actual air temperatures. At -60, your breath crystallizes instantly, equipment fails, batteries die, fuel doesn't burn efficiently, human tissue begins freezing within 30 seconds of exposure. But the cold is just the beginning. Wind on Mount Vinson is unlike anywhere else on this list because Antarctica generates its own unique wind systems. Katabatic winds, dense cold air flowing down from the polar plateau, can accelerate to over 160 kilometers per hour with virtually no warning. These winds are continuous during some periods, not just gusts, creating sustained conditions that can last for days. When katabatic winds combine with storms, wind speeds can exceed 240 kilometers per hour, creating conditions where tents become death traps, and any exposure means almost certain death. The combination of extreme cold and extreme wind creates a wind-chill environment that defies comprehension. When you're facing -50-degree temperatures and 160 km/h winds, the effective temperature drops below -100 degrees. At these conditions, no amount of modern gear provides adequate protection. Your body loses heat faster than it can possibly generate it. Every minute of exposure is a countdown to hypothermia and death. Then there's the continuous daylight. During Antarctic summer, the sun never sets. This might seem like an advantage, but it creates serious problems. Without natural day-night cycles, your circadian rhythm breaks down. Sleep becomes difficult or impossible. Combined with the stress of extreme cold, this sleep deprivation degrades decision-making when you most need to be sharp. The 24-hour daylight also means there's no thermal break, no cooler night period to stabilize snow, no warmer day period to make movement more comfortable. Conditions are relentlessly the same. What makes Vinson's weather particularly dangerous is the isolation. This is Antarctica. If something goes wrong, rescue is measured in days or weeks, not hours. The nearest permanent base is hundreds of kilometers away. Weather can shut down flight operations for extended periods, meaning that even if you can call for help, help might not be able to reach you. You're completely on your own in one of the most remote places on Earth, facing weather conditions that would kill you in minutes without proper shelter. Storm duration on Vinson can be truly brutal. Antarctic storms don't follow the patterns of mountain weather elsewhere. They can last for weeks, pinning teams in their tents with no ability to move. During these storms, temperatures plunge, winds reach their peak intensity, and the world outside your tent simply ceases to exist. You're trapped in a small tent, listening to wind that sounds like a jet engine, feeling the fabric flexing violently with each gust, wondering if this will be the gust that tears everything apart. Time becomes meaningless. You burn through fuel trying to stay warm, food runs low, and the storm just continues. The psychological impact of Vinson's weather cannot be overstated. This isn't a mountain where you can see the summit and feel inspired. For much of the climb, visibility is so poor you can't see anything beyond your immediate vicinity. The cold is so intense that every task becomes an ordeal. Setting up camp, melting water, eating food, simple activities become major operations requiring careful planning and significant time. The weather grinds you down mentally before you even begin climbing. But here's what's remarkable. People do climb Mount Vinson. Guided expeditions operate there during the brief Antarctic summer, taking advantage of slightly less severe conditions and the continuous daylight to move quickly when weather permits. These climbers face conditions that would have been considered impossible just a few decades ago, made survivable only by modern gear, instant communication, and careful timing. Even so, the weather remains the dominant factor in every decision. From K2's savage winds to Mount Vinson's Antarctic extremes, these mountains remind us that sometimes the greatest challenge isn't the climb itself, but knowing when nature is simply too powerful to overcome. Weather doesn't care about your skill level, your experience, or your determination. It operates on its own scale, following patterns that span continents and seasons. Modern technology has helped. Weather forecasting gives climbers windows they can exploit. Satellite communication provides safety nets. Advanced gear extends the limits of human survival. But the fundamental truth remains. When the weather turns truly extreme on these peaks, humans have no chance. We survive only during brief periods when conditions moderate slightly, when the mountain momentarily relaxes its guard. The rest of the time, these places belong to the wind, the cold, and the storm. These mountains have taught us that true mountaineering wisdom isn't about conquering nature. It's about understanding when to attempt the climb and when to turn back. Which of these weather systems would you be willing to face? Could you handle K2's unpredictable violence, Annapurna's constant avalanche danger, the jet stream winds on Everest, the relentless cold of Antarctica? Let me know in the comments which peak's weather seems most terrifying to you, and whether you think technology will eventually make these conditions truly survivable. If you enjoyed this journey through Earth's most extreme mountain weather, subscribe for more explorations of the world's most incredible and hostile environments. Next time, we'll look at mountains that hold other extreme records, the most isolated, the most forbidden, the most technically difficult. Until then, stay curious, stay safe, and remember that sometimes the mountains teach us the most important lessons by simply saying no. Thanks for watching.